The moment I perceived my own deputy calling in a grievance about my farm, I nearly dropped my coffee. At first, I thought he was joking. Bobby Ray had a tendency to overstate minor issues just to see my reaction. But the way he faltered on the phone told me this was different. Someone had actually called the cops on my property, and not just anyone. Karen Simmons. I almost laughed. Almost. Boss, you ain't going to believe this, but we got a lady down at your front gate alleging your farm is breaking multiple laws. She says she's got evidence and wants the sheriff himself to shut it down, Bobby Ray said, his voice laced with humor. I rubbed my temples. Bobby, you do realize I am the sheriff, right? Oh, I told her that, Bobby said quickly. She said, and I quote, even the sheriff isn't above the law. Now, Ed laughed loud. Let me guess. She doesn't know whose farm she's complaining about. Not a clue, Bobby confirmed. She's just out here arms crossed, fuming mad, demanding justice. Justice over what? I sighed, grabbed my hat and headed out. If there was one thing I knew about Karen Simmons, it was that she could make a controversy out of a paperclip lying on the wrong side of a desk. By the time I pulled up to the gate, Bobby Ray was standing off to the side, arms folded, watching Karen argue with thin air. The woman was pacing back and forth, wagging her finger at nothing in particular, like she was practicing her speech for a courtroom drama. Aha, the sheriff's finally here, she said as soon as she saw my truck. I demand immediate action. I stepped out, still in my dusty work clothes, and leaned against the hood. Karen, what exactly is the problem here? She narrowed her eyes at me as if she just noticed I existed. Then she turned to Bobby. Who's this? Bobby snorted. That's Sheriff Jake Lawson. Karen's face went expressionless. She looked at me again, her mouth opening and closing like a fish that just realized it was out of water. This is your farm? Yep, I said, tipping my hat. Now, what's this urgent crime spree I'm supposedly running? Her composure returned as quickly as it had disappeared. Well, that does change anything, she huffed. Even you have to follow the law, Sheriff. I've been keeping records, and I have proof that your farm is a public disturbance. I crossed my arms. Is that so? Karen whipped out a notepad from her purse. First of all, your rooster is in clear violation of noise ordinances. It crows at unholy hours of the morning, 5 a.m. sharp. Bobby Ray coughed into his hand. Ah, Karen, that's what roosters do. Karen shot him a glare. Not in a civilized society. She flipped a page. And let's talk about the smell. The odor of manure is unbearable. I can smell it all the way from my backyard. I raised an eyebrow. Karen, you live 2 miles away. Exactly. That's how bad it is. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Anything else? Oh, there's plenty more, she said, her voice growing dramatic. You have unregistered animals. On this farm, I saw a pig running around loose without a leash. That's a safety hazard. Bobby Ray let out a small choking sound, his face red from trying to suppress his laughter. Karen, I said as calmly as I could, that pig's name is Bacon Bits, and he's my pet. He doesn't need a leash. Because this is a farm. She huffed again. And I suppose you have legal documentation proving this pig is allowed to be here? I stared at her blankly. Karen, it's a farm. She crossed her arms. Well, I'll be filing a formal complaint. I'll have this place inspected, and if I find even one violation, I'll make sure this farm is shut down for good. Bobby Ray let out a low whistle. You sure you want to go that path, Karen? She lifted her chin. Absolutely. I sighed, finally losing my temper. Karen, you do realize you just called the cops on the sheriff, right? For a split second, I saw doubt flash in her eyes. But instead of backing down, she squared her shoulders and said, then you of all people should know the law better. I ran a hand down my face. Karen, do you even have a justification for all this? Or are you just here because you ran out of things to complain about? Her lips tightened. The reason is simple, Sheriff. Rules are rules, and no one is above them. Not even you. She turned on her heel, storming off like she had just won a great triumph. I exhaled slowly. Bobby Ray let out a low chuckle. You know she ain't going to let this go, right? "Oh, I know," I murmured. "I just don't know if I should be entertained or worried." The next morning I got my answer. I woke up to the sound of vehicles pulling up to my property. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and nearly spit it out when I saw a convoy of county inspectors, clipboards in hand, standing at my gate. And right there at the front, grinning like a cat that just ate a canary, was Karen. "Morning, Sheriff," she called cheerfully. "Hope you don't mind a standard inspection." I let out a slow breath. "Oh, for the love of Bobby." Ray walked up beside me, holding his own cup of coffee, staring at the scene like it was the world's most ridiculous procession. "Well, boss, looks like Karen's just declared war." I took a long sip of coffee and whispered, "Then I guess it's time we fight back." The sun was barely up, and my morning coffee had just started working its magic when I found myself staring at a lineup of county officials standing at my front gate like they were about to raid a crime scene. Karen stood at the front of the group, glowing like she had just won the lottery. Behind her were two health inspectors, a zoning officer, and even someone from animal control. I took a deep breath, resisting the urge to roll my eyes. Bobby Ray, still in his pajamas, strolled up next to me, taking a slow sip from his coffee mug. "Well, boss, looks like the cavalry is here. Should I go get my white flag, or are we fighting this one out?" Karen cleared her throat loudly. "Sheriff Lawson, we're here to perform an official inspection of your property based on numerous reports of code violations." She made a dramatic gesture toward the clipboard she was holding, like she was revealing some groundbreaking legal document. "I trust you'll cooperate fully." I stared at her for a long moment, then looked at the poor officials standing behind her. They all had the look of people who had been pressured into this nonsense, probably because Karen had badgered them until they gave, and just to shut her up. I exhaled slowly, forcing a smile. "Of course, Karen, I have nothing to hide. Let's get this over with." Karen gave a self-satisfied nod and stepped aside as the inspector shuffled in. The first stop was the barn where my cows were lined up for their morning feeding. The health inspector, a tired-looking woman who had clearly seen worse, glanced around and jotted a few notes. "Cows look healthy. No signs of mistreatment. No excessive waste buildup." Karen frowned. "Are you sure? I distinctly recall seeing an unsanitary pile of..." The inspector held up a hand. "Ma'am, this is a farm. Manure is kind of expected." Karen huffed, but said nothing. Next, the animal control officer inspected Bacon Bits, my notorious pet pig. He scratched his head as he looked at the pudgy little guy who was currently rolling around in the dirt without a care in the world. "Ah, he looks fine to me," the officer muttered. Karen crossed her arms. "I demand to see his paperwork." I sighed and pulled out a folder from my truck. "Here's his registration, vaccination records, and proof that he's legally allowed to exist on this farm." Karen snatched the papers, scanning them furiously as if she'd find some hidden technicality. Finally, she thrust them back at me. "This doesn't mean you're in the clear yet." Bobby Ray let out a low whistle. "Man, she's really going for that villain and courtroom drama routine, huh?" Karen shot him a glare. We moved on to the fencing where the zoning officer checked to ensure my property lines were correct. Karen followed him closely, practically breathing down his neck. "I'm telling you, there has to be something unlawful here. An unauthorized structure." Maybe the zoning officer gave me a tired look. "Sheriff, do you have any unpermitted buildings on this land?" "Nope." He nodded. "All right, then. No issues here." Karen's face twitched. She was losing, and she knew it. But instead of backing down, she pulled out her final strategy. A printout of an obscure environmental regulation? "What about this?" she declared, waving the document in front of the health inspector. "According to county law, excessive livestock waste near a natural water source is a direct breach of environmental safety codes. And if I recall correctly, Sheriff Lawson has a pond right over there." The group turned toward the pond where my ducks were happily paddling around. The health inspector sighed and walked over, taking a few samples. After a few minutes, she checked her readings and shrugged. "Water's clean. No contamination." Karen's eye twitched. "But, ma'am," the inspector interrupted, rubbing her temple, "I think we're done here." Karen's jaw tightened so hard I thought she might break a tooth. One by one, the officials packed up their things, offering me apologetic nods as they left. The health inspector patted my shoulder. "Sorry about the trouble, Sheriff. Have a good day." Karen, however, wasn't finished. She turned to me with an icy glare. "Don't think this is over." I crossed my arms. "Karen, you just dragged half the county out here and wasted their time. What exactly are you trying to do for?" For the first time, she hesitated. It was brief, just a flicker of uncertainty, but I saw it. And that's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just doing this for the sake of rules. She had an ulterior motive. I took a step closer. "Karen, why are you really doing this?" She scoffed. "Because rules exist for a reason." And cut the act. I narrowed my eyes. "You're up to something." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, but I saw her fingers quiver, like she was gripping her clipboard a little too tightly. She turned on her heel. "You'll find out soon enough." And just like that, she was gone. Bobby Ray watched her drive off, shaking his head. "What do you think she's up to?" I frowned, watching the dust settle behind her car. Something tells me this isn't just about my farm. The next day I got my answer. A town council meeting was called, something that rarely happened outside of major issues. Curious, I showed up early, taking a seat in the back. The moment the meeting started, Karen stood up, cleared her throat, and made her declaration. "I am proposing a rezoning of the land surrounding my property to allow for a new community development project." My gut tightened. The mayor frowned. "What kind of development?" Karen smiled, all teeth. "A high-end yoga retreat and wellness center, of course. A place for peace, relaxation, and organic living. But unfortunately, it simply won't be possible unless we address the disruptive farm next door." My jaw clenched. Bobby Ray leaned over and whispered, "She's trying to run you off your own land." I exhaled slowly, keeping my expression calm. I should have seen this coming. Karen didn't care about rules. She cared about getting rid of me. The mayor rubbed his chin. "Well, Karen, that land's been farmland for generations." I don't know if Karen waved a hand. "Oh, I'm sure we can work something out. Perhaps monetary incentives for the sheriff to relocate." The room went silent. I stood up slowly. "Karen," she turned, faking surprise. "Oh, Sheriff. Fancy seeing you here." I took a step forward. "Let me make something clear. This farm isn't going anywhere, and neither am I." She smiled sweetly. "Oh, we'll see about that." The conflict had officially begun the moment Karen declared war on my farm. I knew she wouldn't stop until she either got her way or humiliated herself trying. And given her track record, I wasn't betting on the second option. She had already wasted county resources, pushed for inspections that led to nothing. And now she was going straight for the core, trying to rezone my land out from under me. I left that town hall meeting without saying another word to her. There was no point in arguing with someone who had already decided she was right. But that didn't mean I was just going to let her win. Bobby Ray was waiting for me outside, leaning against my truck with his arms crossed. "Well," he said, watching Karen as she charmed up to one of the council members, "that went about as expected." I opened the door, climbing into the driver's seat. "She's pushing something bigger than a zoning complaint. Nobody goes this hard over a rooster and a pig." Bobby slid into the passenger side, rubbing his chin. "You thinking what I'm thinking? That she's concealing something?" I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. "Yeah." I spent the next few days digging. If Karen was willing to play dirty, I'd return the favor. Legally, of course. I scoured through public records, land purchase documents, business filings, anything that could tell me what she was up to. It didn't take long to find something interesting. Karen had recently applied for several permits under the name of a newly formed LLC, Serenity Valley Wellness Retreat, the proposed site right next to my farm. But there was a catch. The environmental impact reports on her land had come back less than favorable. Too much runoff, unstable soil potential, contamination, risks, basically everything that made the property useless for what she wanted, unless she could transfer that problem onto someone else. That's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just trying to get rid of my farm for the sake of her fancy retreat. She was trying to shift the environmental restrictions onto my land so that she could build on hers. If my farm was declared a nuisance or an environmental hazard, she could swoop in, claim her property was the better alternative. And suddenly, all of her obstacles would disappear right along with my home. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the report in my hands. Bobby Ray, who had been pacing the room, stopped and whistled low. "Well, that explains a lot." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, and now I know exactly how to stop her." It was time to fight back. The first step was gathering evidence. If Karen wanted to play the legal game, I'd play it better. I needed something concrete, proof that she was manipulating the system. Lucky for me, she wasn't. As careful as she thought, with a little help from a few trusted friends in the county office, I got my hands on some interesting documents. Turns out Karen had been disposing waste from her smoothie bar illegally, specifically into a protected wetlands area behind her property. The same woman who had been screaming about environmental violations had been committing them herself. It was almost too easy. The next town council meeting was packed. News of Karen's schemes had spread fast, and people were eager to see what she was going to try next. She walked in with her usual confidence, her designer bag swinging at her side, acting like she already owned half the town. I let her talk first. She launched into the same speech about preserving the essence of the town, developing spaces for mindfulness and wellness, and of course, relocating disruptive agricultural elements for the greater good. The council members nodded along, some more interested than others, but when she got to the part about rezoning, I stood up. "Karen," I said, my voice cutting through her scripted monologue, "before we move forward with this proposal, I have a few things I'd like to share with the council." She turned her smile tight. "Oh, Sheriff, I didn't realize you had such a strong interest in zoning laws." I held up a thick file. "I do when they're being exploited." The room went silent. I walked to the front, handing the folder to the mayor. "This is a report detailing multiple environmental violations on Karen's current property, including illegal waste dumping into protected wetlands." A whisper rippled through the room. Karen's face lost its arrogance. The mayor flipped through the pages, frowning deeper with each one. "Karen, these are serious accusations." Karen let out a stiff laugh. "This is absurd. Clearly, this is just an attempt to undermine me." I tilted my head. "You sure about that? Because these reports come from the county environmental agency. Would you like me to call a representative to confirm them?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. The mayor sighed. "Well, Karen, considering this information, I don't think we'll be moving forward with any zoning modifications at this time." Karen's face turned red. She spun on her heel and stormed toward the exit. But before she could make a clean retreat, Bobby Ray called out, "Oh, Karen, one more thing." She stopped, but didn't turn around. Bobby grinned. "Since you're so concerned about rules and all, you might want to check your mailbox. I think you're about to get penalized." The room erupted into laughter. Karen shoved open the doors and vanished into the night. The battle was over. A week later, life on my farm was back to normal. No more surprise inspections, no more zoning threats, and best of all, no more Karen. She had gone silent after the whole mess, licking her wounds in private. I figured she'd be back eventually, but for now, I was enjoying the peace. Bobby Ray leaned against the fence, watching Bacon Bit stroll through the yard. "Gotta say, boss, that was some of your finest work." I smirked. "It was gratifying, wasn't it?" He nodded. "But I got to ask, was the town barbecue named after her really necessary?" I chuckled. "Oh, absolutely." Karen's farewell feast had been a huge success. The whole town had turned out for it, laughing at the ridiculousness of the past few weeks while enjoying the best ribs and smoked pork in the county. And for one final touch of irony, I had even made sure Bacon Bits got a little seat of honor. Alive and well, justice had never tasted so good.